welcome back. Now for the news in detail. We begin from the United States, whose President Donald Trump threatens to destroy Turkey's economy if it takes any unlawful actions in Syria. Earlier, the United States started withdrawing its troops from northeastern Syria to make a way for a Turkish operation against the Kurdish fighters.
US President Donald Trump is threatening to destroy Turkey's economy if it takes any unlawful actions in Syria. Earlier, the United States began withdrawing its troops from northeastern Syria to make way for a Turkish operation against Kurdish fighters. At the White House, Trump said he warned President Tayyip Erdogan that Turkey could find itself with a ravaged economy.
That was many, many years ago, and we only have 50 people in that area. That's a small sector, and I don't want those 50 people hurt or killed or anything. I don't want anything bad to happen to our people, and I told that to President Erdogan. I said, don't hurt any of our people get hurt. Big trouble.
Kurdish-led forces have been a key US ally in Syria against ISIS, but Turkey regards them as terrorists. Earlier, President Erdogan said his country is determined to clear the border region of terrorists and ensure Turkey's security. The SDF says the troop withdrawal is a breach of US commitments that will have a negative impact on the war against ISIS.
The EU has warned Turkey against a military operation in northeastern Syria. EU High Representative Federica Mogherini said the incursion will undermine international coalition's fight against ISIS. Mogherini said the military action will hamper the UN-led political process in the region. This statement comes in response to the US pulling its troops out of northeastern Syria. The White House said Ankara will now be responsible for all ISIS fighters captured in the area in the last 2 years. Meanwhile, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said Ankara is determined to clear the border region of terrorists and ensure Turkey's security. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif discussed the issue with his Turkish counterpart Mevlut Cavusoglu over the phone. Speaking after a conversation, Zarif said Ankara should respect Syria's territorial integrity while defeating terrorists. Meanwhile, the UN says it is prepared for a very close coordination with Turkey on a possible military operation in northern Syria. In an interview, UN Assistant Secretary General Panos Momsezis said Ankara has made the necessary assurances on humanitarian issues. Momsezis praised Ankara's role in supporting humanitarian operations in the region over the year. He said Turkey's generosity with refugees needs to continue. Now, for more on this, we are joined by Ms. Mimi El-Lahem. She is an Australia-based political analyst. Thank you very much, Ms. Lahem, for joining us. Now, Ms. Lahem, President Trump's decision to remove some US forces from northeastern Syria opens the door to a Turkish offensive against the US allied Kurdish fighters. So, has President Trump upended his own policy on Syria?
Well, he was actually voted into power under the promise that he would pull US soldiers out of Syria. And that's supposed to be his policy. So in fact, this is him enacting the policy that he's promised his voters for the last few years. Of course, the US is illegally occupying Syria. They've already invaded and occupied Syria. So it's not like they are the judge and arbiter of who gets to invade Syria. They themselves are invaders. So the fact that they are pulling out is a good thing. Even though Turkey is invading, Turkey has already invaded other regions of Syria. So I guess this could mean that instead of facing 2 invaders, Syria will only be facing 1.
Right, with 2 invaders now, the European has also warned Turkey against a military operation in northeastern Syria. However, United Nations has said that it is prepared for a very close coordination with Turkey on this possible military operation. So, Ms. Lahem, is there a lack of world consensus on such global issues?
I think that there is a lack of consensus because there's 2 agendas here that are in conflict. One agenda is very much supported by Israel, which is to try and create a Kurdistan in the region, and especially to try to create separate mini-states that would be in perpetual war with each other in order to alleviate some of the pressure on Israel. The other agenda would be NATO. NATO wants to maintain its strategic depth, and that would very much require Turkey to remain a member state of NATO. And the US knows it can only support one of these two agendas. Of course, we have Russia and Iran and China also, who are member states of the United Nations, and they have their own agenda also, as well as Syria, of course.
Right, thank you for Ms. Mimi Al-Lahem for updating us on Syria. Now, moving on, 3 militants from the Kurdistan Workers' Party have been killed in Turkish airstrikes during a counter-terrorism operation in northern Iraq. In a statement, Turkey's National Defense Ministry says military operations backed by air power were carried out in the Gara region. The ministry says Turkey will continue to destroy terrorist weapons cache and shelters. Over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 4 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terrorist campaign. Moving on, Prime Minister Imran Khan says Pakistan has made great advances in easing conditions for doing business in the country. Speaking in Beijing to the China Council for Promoting Trade, Khan said Pakistan presents a huge opportunity for investment and trade. Prime Minister Khan said the country has a vital strategic location, a bustling young population and investor-friendly policies. He also said the government is removing obstacles to industries in Pakistan. The Prime Minister talked about special economic zones established in Pakistan to eliminate trade and investment barriers. Khan pointed out textiles, IT and tourism, amongst other sectors, have the most potential. He added Islamabad has created a CPEC authority under the Prime Minister's office to make operations smooth. The Prime Minister said the Gwadar Port Master Plan has been improved and tax relief granted at Live Port.
It is not essentially KP.
Now, for more on this, we are joined now from Beijing by our correspondent, Patrick Falk. Thank you, Patrick, for joining us in Indus News. Now, Patrick, tell us, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, regional security and the Kashmir issues are at the top of the agenda of Prime Minister Khan's visit to China. So, Patrick, can you share the details of the meetings he has had so far?
Well, as far as we understand, he has met Li Keqiang at the Great Hall of the People's just a stone's throw away from where I'm standing, and we are told that he is to attend a banquet with Premier Li this evening. We're told that he's not meant to be meeting President Xi Jinping until tomorrow, but the Foreign Ministry has told us that this trip, this visit, continues this long-standing tradition of the two countries regularly meeting to consult each other on matters related to bilateral, regional and international issues of mutual interest. A lot's being made about the timing of this visit coming ahead of President Xi's visit to India, where he's expected to meet with India's Prime Minister Modi. But there is very clearly a focus on economic and trade ties between Pakistan and China here. You only need to look at the delegation that's joining Prime Minister Khan to know that. That includes Foreign Minister Qureshi, as well as Railway Minister Sheikh Rashid and Planning Minister Kuro Bakhtar as well. And of course, CPEC is at the top of the agenda in that regard, and they are, as far as we understand, going to be advising China on speeding up the CPEC projects, which have of late been reportedly slowing down. But the Pakistan delegation is here to reassure China that it is very much on course and wants to expand on some of the projects as well.
Right, Patrick, Prime Minister made a very powerful pitch to the Chinese investors at today's business forum. So, considering the massive state investment made through CPEC, how interested are the Chinese corporations in the emerging Pakistani market?
Well, as we know, it's a strategic ally, and it is a core focus, being part of the Belt and Roads project as well. We are told that there are a number of projects that Pakistan would like to expand on, including LNG terminals, the Bunji hydropower project, as well as steel mills and refineries as well. What sort of response there's been from China for the time being, we just don't know, but certainly these are going to be of interest to China, who certainly want to continue with the CPEC project and the continuation of BRI.
Right, Patrick, now let's about Kashmir now. China is a party to the Kashmir dispute, and Khan's visit to Beijing comes just a few days ahead of President Xi's trip to India. So should we expect him to try to reduce tensions between India and Pakistan when he meets the Prime Minister Modi?
Well, that will certainly be Prime Minister Khan's hope, and as I said before, much has been made about the timing for this visit, coming just 3 days before President Xi heads to India, where he'll meet Prime Minister Modi. Now, the big question is to what extent China is going to get involved. Previously, we've spoken before about China perhaps wanting to play the role of peacemaker between the two sides, and of course China has its own interests in the region as well, but there's a big doubt as to whether or not President Xi will want to talk to any great extent on that matter with Prime Minister Modi, given the economic and trade ties that is being placed as a matter of importance to China between China and India as well.
Right, thank you, Patrick Falk, for joining us and updating on the Prime Minister's visit to China. Now, for more on this, we are also joined by Mr. Andrew K.P. Leung. Thank you for your time, Mr. Leung. Please tell us, how can Prime Minister Imran Khan's trip to China strengthen trade ties between the two countries and strengthen CPEC?
Well, you can see what is going on here in the region. It's a bit of hedging and balancing on all sides, because the geostrategic interests of all these countries involved, China, India, Pakistan, and Nepal, for example, in some ways they overlap, but in many other ways they are divergent. And so all these visits suggest that it's a question of balancing against each other and trying to find common grounds on trade, economic cooperation, but also trying to find out in what way the differences could be better managed. If we look at the visit of Prime Minister Khan from Pakistan, of course, Pakistan is reportedly a cast iron friend of China, but on the other hand, Pakistan is a deadly enemy against India. And then there are, of course, the perception that Pakistan is housing or accommodating terrorist groups, which can threaten Indian security. And as far as China is concerned, there are territorial disputes with India, long-standing territorial disputes. For example, not so long ago, the conflict over Dok Lam, and then recently there was a massive mountain combat exercise in Arunachal Pradesh, which is the region which China has territorial claims. So I think that on the other hand, there are a lot of common economic interests. For example, the huge regional multilateral free trade agreement, the so-called Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, including all the ASEAN countries and their trading partners, one of the largest free trade blocs in the world. And of course, India wants to play an important role in that. And of course, as far as Pakistan is concerned, the kind of China-Pakistan economic corridor, as suggested earlier, as covered earlier.
Right, Mr. Andrew, thank you so much for your time and for your updates. Now, moving on, in a fresh act of terrorism, Indian forces have martyred another youth in occupied Kashmir. The civilian was targeted by occupation troops during a search and call-in operation in Pulwama district. 8 youths have been martyred by the occupation forces in Ganderbal district last week. Meanwhile, Pakistan's UN envoy Maliha Lodhi highlighted the plight of women and children in Indian occupied Kashmir. Addressing a discussion forum at the UNGA, Lodhi exposed the atrocities of Indian forces as the valley remains under a complete curfew. Referring to a story in New York Times, she said anguish of a Kashmiri mother was captured by a heart-wrenching picture in the newspaper. The draconian curfew and communications blackout in the valley has entered its 65th consecutive day. Meanwhile, 284 Indian academics, politicians and journalists have called occupied Kashmir's annexation and lockdown unacceptable. In a letter to Indian Prime Minister Modi, they have asked for an immediate end to the communications blackout in the valley. The Indian intellectual said Modi's administration's decision to deactivate Article 370 of the Constitution was taken without consulting Kashmiris. They asked Modi to roll back his government's illegal decision and allow Kashmiris to decide their constitutional status. They called on the Indian government to end the communications blackout in the valley on humanitarian grounds. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Sikhs across the world have lauded the Kartarpur Corridor project. In an interview, Qureshi said the Sikh community in Europe and Canada has shown an overwhelming response over the project. He said Pakistan is preparing accommodation and other necessary facilities for their visit next month. Pakistan will open the corridor on 9th of November, days before Sikhism's founder Baba Guru Nanak's 550th birth anniversary on November 12th. Meanwhile, the people of Pakistan are commemorating the 14th anniversary of the catastrophic earthquake of 2005. 73,000 people lost their lives and over 100,000 were injured in the 7.6 magnitude quake. The natural calamity left over 3.5 million people homeless.
The 8th of October will always be remembered as a day of mourning in Pakistan's history. Millions lost their loved ones and everything else in a matter of seconds. 14 years later, people of the former disaster zone still vividly remember their suffering. Because of the gigantic scale of the event, the government couldn't cope alone. The people of Pakistan stepped in to shore up the rescue and funding operation. And so did the rest of the world, with a helping hand in search and rescue, and later the rehabilitation of the affected people.
SIRA has completed 5,540 projects and handed over to the line departments. 1,300 projects are underway and 900 projects are yet to be started due to the paucity of funds.
The National Disaster Management Authority now marks October 8th as National Resilience Day.
We have now notified this day as National Resilience Day. We want to exhibit our resolve that this country and its people are resilient to different disasters. We have withstood mega disasters unknown in the recent history.
MDMA spokesman says the lion's share of reconstruction work after the earthquake has been completed.
So they have, as of now, completed 73% of all those conceived projects. 15% of the projects are ongoing and they are under implementation, while around 12% of the projects have been stopped.
Last week's earthquake in Mirpur revived unhappy memories of the 2005 disaster.
Moving on, in Afghanistan, a suicide bomber kills 14 people and wounds 37 others in Jalalabad city. Officials said the attack targeted a bus carrying security forces. They said some of the wounded were in critical condition. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Now moving to central Afghanistan, where 20 students, including 15 women and 5 men, have been injured in a blast inside Ghazni University. Provincial hospital head Baz Mohammed says the bomb went off during a lecture at the university. The official said the injured have been taken to a nearby hospital and security forces have cordoned off the area. Condemning the attack, the Taliban said targeting innocent civilians is a violation of Islamic and human principles. Now, Iraq's military has admitted that it used excessive force in deadly anti-government protests. The military said force outside the rules of engagement was used. It said commanding officers involved will be held accountable. President Barham Saleh has called for a halt to escalation after widespread protests. In a televised speech, Saleh urged security forces to preserve the rights of all Iraqis and called for de-escalation. The president also urged Parliament to enact reforms, including electoral reform, to address the demands of protesters.
The government and the security forces reaffirmed that there has been no orders to fire at protesters, and it has not been issued by the country and their instruments. Therefore, those who are committing these actions are criminals and outlaws.
Now, Chinese tech companies have voiced strong opposition to the U.S. government's decision to add them to a trade blacklist. In comments to state media, the firm says the move will hurt U.S. suppliers and hamper efforts to improve human rights around the world. The U.S. Department of Commerce placed 8 Chinese technology giants on a blacklist yesterday, accusing them of implications in human rights violations. It said no American businesses can sell technology to the banned Chinese companies without government approval. But a spokesman for the world's leading video surveillance company, Hikvision, said it respects human rights. The spokesman said Washington's decision could harm Hikvision's U.S. business partners and have a negative impact on the American economy. A UN racism expert has criticized the Dutch ban on wearing face coverings, saying the law has no place in a tolerant society. The UN Special Rapporteur on Racism, Tendai Aishium, says the ban reflects a wider consolidation of Islamophobia in the Netherlands. Akwemi said the ban has no place in a society which prides itself in promoting gender equality. Under the ban, people must be recognizable in public spaces, so it applies to face covering, helmets or hoods, and is punishable by 150 euros fine. The Dutch ban took effect in August after being passed by Parliament in 2018. The ban makes it illegal to wear face coverings in public buildings and on transport. Meanwhile, 500 people have been arrested after mass protests erupted in Ecuador over the government's withdrawal of fuel subsidies. Thousands of protesters took to the streets of the capital, Quito, attacking buildings, blocking roads and starting fires. The removal of fuel subsidies by market-friendly President Lenín Moreno has sparked the country's worst unrest in years. In the meantime, 3 of the country's major oil fields have closed their operations in protest at Moreno's austerity measures. The Energy Ministry says the suspensions could reduce the country's crude output by almost 60,000 barrels a day. President Moreno has called the unrest an attempted coup. Now, in business stories, uncertainty about the outcome of resumed trade talks between the US and China has had a mixed effect on stock markets in Asia and Europe. Investor confidence has been undermined by reports that Beijing is reluctant to sign the broad-based trade agreement wanted by US President Trump. The CAC 40 index in Paris is trading 0.33% lower. The DAX in Frankfurt has followed suit despite an unexpected resurgence in Germany's manufacturing sector in September. The FTSE 100 in London is flat. In Asia, confusion about the fresh trade talks between Beijing and Washington saw markets retreat from from early June. The Shanghai Composite and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index closed fractionally higher. But Asia's richest bourse, the Nikkei 225 in Tokyo, rose by more than 1%. South Korea's Kospi Index also picked up well over 1% after market heavyweight Samsung gained ground. Now it's time for the weather update. Well, with the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and updates, stay tuned with Indus News.